Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Dualistic Unity. I am Andrew.
And I'm going to be playing the part of Ray again.
All right. So we're just chatting about some work related things. We both have full-time jobs. If people forget that sometimes, I always get that question. Like, what do you do for work? Like, is TikTok your job? And I'm like, no, I have a full-time job. One day it will be, these types of things will be, but I do enjoy having the balance for now. Like it's not something, there are things that come up, which we were just discussing, that are just like, this is so inefficient. There's better ways to do this or whatever. And a lot of times when you're involved, it's like a pretty typical 9 to 5 job in digital advertising. And there are times when people just fill that time because they're supposed to fill that time. And I think there's been a shift to being more efficient since everyone, at least in my industry, pretty much works remote and works from home. So there's not as much of that. Like you need to fill the 8 hours. And I fully take advantage of that. I go on lots of walks throughout the day. And when there's some downtime, find other things to do. And I have other things to do. So I'm never, bored with that. But yeah, it is interesting, the society that we've sort of built with this expectation of it's just like people say it's the way things are. And Ray, you mentioned that I was expressing that in videos more recently, just how just a lot of it doesn't make any sense. And like, it doesn't have to be this way. There was no rules saying that this is how things were supposed to turn out or had to turn out, just how they happened to turn out. But it's not necessarily how it was supposed to. Not that it isn't supposed to be this way or right or wrong or anything like that. Those are perceptions, as we've discussed plenty of times. But yeah, you'd start to ask more questions, I think, the deeper you go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'd be like, you work really hard on building yourself a hut, say in the woods, and you work hard, you build it. You're like, yeah, this makes sense. And then you walk into the hut and there's a rave going on. You're like, what the hell just happened? How is this happening inside what should be a fairly simple and quiet hut? And it's just because somewhere in the process of building that hut, we lost track of what we were doing. We got carried away. We started working on distraction, or we started wanting to feel better than the other people working on the hut, and it became a whole game. And so despite the fact that from the outside it should all be very simple, on the inside we've all just got lost in the habit of being in the hut, and whatever that means, right? And so despite the fact that it is still the same life it's always been, we've just piled so much more on top of it. And we get caught up on the image we want to be, and we completely lose track of building the hut. We can lose track of exactly how badly we're putting this house together, or how badly this thing is organized. And that's why everything's falling apart. That's why we consistently have a wider and wider gap between the rich and the poor, because it's badly organized. It's not that the system is bad. It's that the mentality that created, sustains, and runs that system continues to be poison. We can't do anything with it, because as long as there's a profit center to our society, there's always going to be the temptation to cut corners. There's always going to be the temptation to water down the product, to basically make it worse and worse and worse. So you'll buy more and more and more, because profit is the incentive, right? So as long as we're greedy, as long as we're gluttonous, it doesn't matter. We can't do anything with it. But we don't talk about that. We're like, no. We just got to change the economy. We just have to change the monetary policy. We just have to change the regulations for the banks. It's like, no, we don't. This isn't about the economy. This isn't about the monetary system. This is about us not being able to get over this idea that we need more and more and more. Right? So it's our system in a nutshell, in all facets. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, look at the infrastructure problem happening in states right now. Right? That infrastructure didn't happen. That problem didn't happen overnight. That happened over a very long time. And it's not like the infrastructure hasn't been crumbling. It just wasn't a priority compared to all of the other things that were more sensational and entertaining.
Yeah, and it's almost like we've built this idea of the peak and of like the pinnacle of being, like you said, like rich and famous. And I don't think people like take enough time in their lives to actually think about what their peak or pinnacle would look like, because I've taken some time to do that, and being rich and famous is not it. Like there are so many other parts to life and existence than that. And for whatever reason, that is where our society is sort of fallen upon. And I actually had a guy on my podcast yesterday. His name is Eric. He's from Canada. He lives in the Canadian Rockies, and he creates content of his family. They're a big outdoors family. He homeschools them. He has a 2, 4, and 7-year-old, I think. And he actually kind of reminded me of you a little bit. I think he's maybe in his early or mid 30s. But they create a lot of like outdoors content. Like he'll put a little microphone on his kids and just like film them. And we talked a lot about, creating, and his whole thing is he doesn't want it to, take away from his time with his family. So he's very much not like the type of person who stages content at all. It's just like, he just makes videos with his family and shares them online. So it's awesome. But we got into the discussion of money, and he is also into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And he was talking about how he does the content, and they have built up a pretty good following, but he also is snow patroller on the side and has a certain amount of income coming in. I think he said his family lives on around like 60 to 70,000 Canadian dollars a year. And we were talking about investing in Bitcoin. And I was talking about how I'm pretty risk tolerant when it comes to those things, because I'm young and I don't have many responsibilities. And it's like, why not? But his perspective was kind of similar, but in the sense that he already feels like he has enough. He is fully fulfilled in everything that he does. So he's dumped a lot of money into this stuff because his thought is he believes in this and he thinks it can go somewhere, and he already is fulfilled. So he doesn't need that money. But if he is correct and it were to hit, then it would be cool. And there are all these things in his community that he would want to be able to use the money for. So it's almost like when you feel fulfilled in your life without the money and the extra stuff, it allows you the freedom to end up taking risks on certain things to end up getting money, but it's not like that let go to receive type thing. It's like, you don't need it. So for him, he was very open about his money, and he was talking about how he's put over the last 4 years, six figures into cryptocurrency. And in his head, that money's gone. He doesn't need it. He's okay without it because he's already completely fulfilled in his day-to-day life with his family, what he does on a day-to-day basis. He doesn't need that money. So it's just there, and see what happens. If it runs up, great. But I think taking the time to have that sort of perspective isn't all that common in our society. But if you were to be able to take that time, all of a sudden you'd realize like maybe not everyone listening to this or everyone out there feels like they would have enough if they were to take the time to really see it. But I think a lot more people than maybe feel like they do, would have that feeling of fulfillment if they just took a second to take a step back and realize all of that, and not be so tied into this societal dance that we've discussed a lot on the last podcast, like how there's just these pinnacles that are just completely made up. And because the majority is striving for that, everyone's just like, oh, they just hop in with it. And they're like, guess I got to do that too.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's funny that I kind of take the same mentality with if somebody's like, can I borrow $10? If I can't spare it, my answer is no. If I can spare it, my answer is yes. But immediately upon lending that person $20 or $10, I just assume it's gone. Right? If I can't lend it out, I don't lend it out. And if I can lend it out, then I just assume it's not coming back. And if it does, cool. But that's the whole point, right? And so to me, it's an investment in that person. It's an investment in the world. It's like, I have enough here, you do something with it, right? And that mentality is ultimately what we're talking about here. I mean, I can't tell you how many times over the last 15 years of my life I have tried to come up with some way to help people who don't have enough, who are trying to get to a point where they can take that time to live their life, where they can just have enough to live and exist and be happy, and the rest of the time just work on themselves, right? But it's very difficult to do that because things are so skewed in our society. You have people who have too much and you have people who don't have enough. And so how do we get to a point where those of us who have enough can distribute it to people who don't, without the middleman, otherwise known as the government or charity or business, taking a chunk out to satisfy themselves? How can we just immediately distribute it to the people who need it. And this is where cryptocurrency immediately tickles my fancy and gets me wondering, like, how can we use something like blockchain technology to keep track of everybody's needs? How can we use blockchain technology to distribute wealth across everybody so everybody has enough, and then the rest of the time we can, talk about our insights and share information and grow as people and do all of that. And I mean, if we wanted to, it's not like it'd be difficult to do. I mean, so you and I started a community Discord for Dualistic Unity, for the audience to have a chance to meet and chat, talk to one another without us being necessarily in the middle. Well, as that grows and those people start to talk more and more and more, we're ultimately going to end up making a bit of a profit off of that. We're going to be able to make some money off the advertisements. Well, the money off the advertisements can immediately go into community projects that help the people who help generate that income, that help people who are part of that community, right? Why can't we do the same with everything else? I mean, this is ultimately what I envisioned with our Patreon campaign, or podcast sponsorships, or YouTube monetization. You and I only need so much. And then after that, we can put it all back out into the universe, which, as we've discussed, is still you and I. It's still reinvesting in our own life. It's just in the long term. It's in the bigger ripple, right? And so there's a mentality there. And what's nice about that mentality is that as soon as we have enough, what happens? Our schedule decreases. We can literally take more time to ourselves and give to other people as a result of doing so. And so I think that if we were to work at that collectively, if each person were to have the time, like you said, to just figure out what's enough for them, what's their peak, right? And then to allow the community that's with them to help them get there. Our rising tide lifts all boats, right? And then they can go back into helping somebody else achieve their peak. But it has to be, a peak based on self-honesty and self-awareness. It can't just be society says I should be this, right? And that's often the case. I mean, how often have you seen people buying things, whether it's clothing or jewelry or anything else, simply to match the image of the celebrity that's selling it?
Yeah, all the time. I've made videos specifically about that. I made one last winter about how it's like an interesting paradox when people buy things to impress other people, and in reality, like they get a really nice car, or Gucci, anything, and it's all like that stuff's not higher quality than anything else you can buy ever. It's just got a name on it, and they do it to impress other people and look a certain way. But the type of people who they're impressing are probably also trying to impress other people. So it's like they just feel this sort of distaste for you having that stuff that they don't have. And then the other people who aren't impressed by it and are, I don't know, have more of a impression based on, like the content of your character or something, don't give a shit. And they might see you and be like, why are you doing that, man? Like, what's going on? Like, is everything all right inside? Like, what are you trying to make up for inside through these material items? So it's an interesting paradox where I think people think it's achieving this certain thing, and in reality, I don't know if it really is.
I can't. An external cannot give you value. It just doesn't, right? What you do with the external, sure, could be a reflection of your value, right? That's about it, though. I mean, like, it doesn't matter if you have a fancy car or a functional car if you're just using the car to get something done, right? That's the whole point. Like, somebody's going to look at you for spending $500,000 on a car just to drive to the grocery store and go, you could have fed how many people with the extra money it cost you to get that car? I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'll get there just as fast. Or you might pass me and get there 10 minutes or 10 seconds faster. Woo. Like, it's just really not that big a deal. But it just comes down to the fact that our priorities are so skewed. We just don't understand that value is not something that we can measure. Like, our value is expressed in what we do. It's expressed in our potential. Up until then, it's not something that we can measure or evaluate or anything else. And we really do get this idea that if we just have an idea of our value, that's the same as having an indication of what our value is. And it's not. Until we get over that, we're always going to look for things to validate us. We're always going to look for those externals to try and pad the hole that we're creating for ourselves.
Yeah. And even I was just thinking about this, even if you stayed on the sort of selfish approach with how you spend your money, like I find it very fascinating. There's so many people out there doing things day to day that they don't enjoy. And yet the way that they could have some semblance of freedom and maybe not have to do that thing that they hate so much is through like having money set aside. Like people almost don't, I feel like people don't even think about that side of it where they could not spend money on dumb shit and actually begin to cultivate and live a life that they enjoy. Like, even in my case, I have been in like the position I'm in. I'm a senior account manager, and my salary is plenty high enough to sustain my lifestyle and have money left over to save and whatnot. But so I've talked to my boss and been like, I'm not pushing for promotion, just a heads up, because I would have to like in more or less words than that. I said it in a way that was not making it seem like I want to do less work straight up, but like I have other things in my life that I enjoy. And if I were to be pushing for promotion and to get promoted, which involves a 15% pay increase, I would have to sacrifice these other things that I enjoy doing. I would probably have to go from, spending X hours a day to maybe, at least 30% more hours a day in order to take on another project to prove that I'm ready for promotion or whatever. But I know that what I have right now is more than enough. I have been able to take a step back and be like, I don't need that extra 15,000 or whatever percent a year to sacrifice the amount of time, because there's another big part of my life that I really enjoy doing. So if people were to realize that if they were even just on the selfish side of it, like to save more and really figure out what actually adds value to their life and not spending money to try and cultivate this perception that they want people to have about them through what they own and all of these material items, then they may be able to begin living a life they actually enjoy more, and maybe take some extra time off in between jobs or something and go. And if maybe they've always wanted to travel but they haven't been able to, it's like that can allow you the freedom to do that and not live such a miserable existence that you're constantly complaining about, and then at the same time you're spending money on dumb shit to impress people you don't even like. So it just, a lot of it just doesn't make much sense, I feel like.
Right. And well, and we get to a point, or at least as we grow up, we start to realize it doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, that's where the banks and the businesses have figured out, well, we need to get to them before that point. So when they're 18, 19, let's offer them a student loan. Let's give them a credit card. Let's give them, easy access to money they haven't earned. Watch them piss that away, and then they have to scramble more and more throughout their life to try and keep up to it, on top of the bad habit of overspending. So now we have a system that's like, here's more and more and more and more credit. Don't worry, we got your back. And we just keep feeding the monster more and more and more, because we lack in ourselves, and there are parasites that are willing to feed off of that, right? And that's where the argument tends to go towards the system trying to keep us down, or those in power trying to work against us. And I just want to reiterate again that this is largely just because of the environment that we've created, that we give those people the chance to flourish, because the environment we're in reinforces their behavior, right? Like we reward people for being greedy because our society gives them the ability to continuously hoard more. If we were to remove that ability, we would find that behavior to be less prevalent. But we encourage that behavior from a very young age. We encourage it in everything. Get more and more for yourself. The more you have, the more valuable you are. And so when you have a system that traps us in that and then makes you invest in that to the point where if you were to wake up and go, yeah, I don't want to value all this anymore, it's like, well, you still have that credit card payment, you still have those mortgages, you still have that lease, you still have that contract you signed, and we know that you did all of that in a state of confusion, but that's not our problem. And so that's it, is you have to start working against that. You have to start going, okay, I'm just going to cut out these credit cards, right? I'm not going to use that. I'm going to go the hard way for a little while so I can clear the slate, which is technically what the economy should have done back in 2008, right? Like all of those companies that were too big to fail should have failed. And we should have picked up the pieces and started from there. But we always try to avoid the pain, and so we sustain the pain.
Yeah, I feel like with the mentality of kind of the hoarding and stuff, it comes down to the mentality. If someone still thinks, which I think is vast majority of people, that they are just this human, then, and they're not anyone else, it's like great to have, empathy for others in a way of like, kind of thinking about putting yourself in their shoes, even if you can't necessarily understand that you would be them if everything, was traded essentially. So if you still think that you're just this human and you're very much separate from everyone and not this deeper I that we all are in the awareness of the universe, then it's a lot. I feel like it's a lot tougher to get to that place. So it's almost like that has to precede this. And since realizing this, even, as recently as I have, it's become a lot clearer to me. And it just makes sense that, because like I walk through the street now in New York, I see everyone way differently than I did 4 months ago. Like significant, like I see that is me. That is me passing me on the street. Like they just have forgotten and whatever, but for whatever reason, they don't know that, but that is me. So it becomes clear. And there's still obviously, I'm not going to give up everything and like walk around the streets naked and homeless, but it's like, it's much clearer in that sense. So it's not like giving things away or, giving a homeless person some money. It's like, I am helping myself. It is still being sort of selfish almost in the sense because I'm everything. So I am being selfish, but that self is the entire universe, omniverse, everything. So yeah, it's selfish, but it's not limited to this perception of separateness. It's selfish in that the opposite of separateness, that I'm everything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's because it's the abandonment of self, right? It's like, oh, I have no borders anymore. I should take care of all of me. Right. And that's pretty much it. But you're right. It's the insight that ultimately is going to reinforce the behavior. Like the environment, changing the environment isn't enough, as we can see from all of the legislation and the rules that they're trying to make around, say carbon emissions. Our perfect example. Creating a carbon tax isn't going to fix the problem. I mean, look at Tesla, right? Tesla creates electric cars, and they don't make any profit whatsoever on their electric cars. What they do is they end up getting carbon credits because they're creating electric cars, and then they sell those carbon credits to the car companies that are creating oil-based cars. So the car companies that are polluting the environment buy the credits from Tesla so they can continue to pollute the environment, and Tesla comes out looking like they're saving the world, right? So
is that for real? Holy fuck. I did not know that. Oh my God.
So again, it comes down to the superficial isn't ever going to solve the problem. We have to look deeper. We have to look at ourselves. We have to look at the system that we're continuing to perpetuate, which is not transparent. Obviously, like if all of a sudden you find out something like that, well, no doubt you're starting to wonder what else you don't know about, and it's because the system is designed to make sure you don't know, right? It's made sure so they can do those backroom deals, and they can do the additions to the infrastructure bill, for example, like Biden's infrastructure bill, where it's like, oh, we're focusing on America's infrastructure. By the way, if you use cryptocurrency and you want to trade over $10,000, we want all your personal info. It's like, that has nothing to do with infrastructure. Why is that in there? Right. And that's the point, though, is that the system isn't transparent. The system is made to cut corners. The system is designed for the people who are in power to do whatever they want. And you would have to be on the ball all the time, looking through each and every bit of legislation that was passing to even have an idea of what was happening. And that wouldn't even be enough because of how much is happening. Right. And any system that's that complex and that convoluted shouldn't be. And the only reason it is because it's habitual, and the people in power want it to continue to be habitual. That's it. It's something that's going to change. But so here's the thing, right? We keep talking about this, and we're doing this podcast. We're encouraging this conversation. We're trying to get people involved. And that is a part of this change. It's the biggest part of this change, in my opinion. Somebody was voicing this to me recently, that it's very difficult to go out to the world and talk to people about this stuff, because most of the time people are focused on what car they drive, or how much money they make, or where they live, or how it identifies their value. And so how do you have conversations with any meaning with people who are in that mentality? And I was trying to respond that, well, you just do your best. I mean, if you don't value those things, that's great. Don't avoid those people. Just try to be as patient as you can, because you're embodying another state of mind. You are giving them the opportunity to see something or feel something that they're not used to feeling. And just in doing that, you're creating a small ripple. But because the dominant narrative is so egotistical, here we are having this conversation, and we're encountering a lot of awkwardness. We're encountering a lot of resistance, because we're on the one side that's kind of turning the tide. We're on the other side of the tide turning. So yeah, it's going to be difficult for us right now. It's going to be difficult for us to continue to have this conversation in the face of all of the opposition, because that opposition is just habitual and it's been ongoing for such a long time. But it started somewhere, right? We started in tribal society. We started in a more unitary mentality. It took the ego time to twist us. It took the ego time to travel from person to person to person, to reinforce itself structurally into the bedrock of how we run our society. It took time. It took thousands of years for us to get this lost. It's going to take some time for us to wake up. It's going to take some more time for the ripples to start to spread, but they are spreading. Over the last 20 years, I've just been watching this conversation go from being ridiculed to being acceptable to being wanted. More and more people want to have this conversation now. That's so encouraging to me. I mean, out of 10 people I meet, it used to be 10 people who would run. Maybe a half person out of every 1,000, right, would say, yeah, let's talk about that. Now it's 2, 3 out of 10 people have some interest, not in realizing we're all God, because that's going pretty deep, admittedly, but in realizing they're not what they think, in realizing that their suffering is largely exacerbated by the illusion that they're caught up in. People want to talk about that now. And that leads to the realization that if you're not what you think, you're everything, as we said, right? That selfishness can go all the way back to unity. But it's just in spreading the awareness, like, this is just a ride. This is just an illusion. It's not what it appears to be, right? And then that's it. And that's what we're doing. And the environment will change as a result.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think it's so important when you mentioned perceptions and just being, and this is one of the core things that we talk about, but just being mindful of your perceptions. I made a video yesterday when I was walking. I've been making more just like kind of ranting for a minute or two and less structured, which I've been enjoying. I've been enjoying mixing in different types of videos, and some longer where it's like less structured and I have pauses and whatever. Whereas in the past, it's historically just been strictly jump cuts and just like very much, edited. So it's like, quick, there's no hesitations or whatever. So I've been mixing in both. And I think I saw a video recently that was talking about just like creator strategies and whatnot. And it's not, I don't think, a formula that is exact that everyone needs to follow, but it mentioned how as a creator building sort of a community, posting, maybe 1 or 2 out of every 10 that you think are like, quicker, more like viral focus type videos. And then the other 8 are more like longer form, just like less produced in a way that it probably won't go viral because it doesn't have all of those TikTok, check boxes or whatever. So I've just been incorporating more of those, just like when I'm walking, something will hit me. So anyway, yesterday I was kind of cold on my walk, and I was like, am I feeling colder because I'm telling myself that I'm cold? Like, this is just a feeling. I'm not even cold. Cold is just a word we use to describe a certain type of feeling. I'm just feeling a certain way, but am I exacerbating that feeling by thinking that? And I think there's so many situations, when someone feels like they're in, a difficult situation or a shitty situation or a tough situation. And that's not to say that those don't occur. They certainly do. And you can label it however you want to label it. It doesn't technically really matter how you label it. But at the end of the day, your perception of it can potentially be exacerbating that situation and making it worse than it actually is, because you keep telling yourself how bad it is. And it goes back to your brain trying to latch onto and confirm, like using that sort of confirmation bias to confirm all of your beliefs about the way that things are. So that's a huge part of our society. And you have a certain belief about the way things are, your brain's just going to keep trying to confirm it. It's going to start picking things out. That's why, you see or start looking for a red car online that you want to buy. All of a sudden, all the cars you see are red. And you're like, did all these red cars start driving into my life? No, they were always there, but you were just, you've been thinking about it. So your brain's confirming that they're out there because you want to purchase it or whatever. And it goes for so many things, but just being mindful, and it's going to happen. It's always going to happen, but just being able to take that split second to catch yourself. And it's pretty much universally applicable. And I think it happens throughout probably everyone's day, like hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of times a day, that we have perceptions about things that are exacerbating the way that they actually are. Like things just are, and we layer on thoughts. Like there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. It's sort of the same type of realm in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to keep that in mind, because right now, a lot of the private coaching sessions that people have been arranging with me have been revolving around what's going on in the world economically, in terms of climate change, carbon tax credits, coronavirus, all of this. And people are panicking, admittedly, because it feels like everything's kind of falling apart. And those with, let's say, less than honest intentions in power are trying to solidify their grip on what's happening. And they're trying to solidify their control of our lives in every aspect, whether it's monetary or otherwise. Like I was saying about Biden's infrastructure bill is a perfect example. And so people are starting to panic. They're starting to view the world as being increasingly encroaching on their lives. And it's because we hear about this stuff every day, because we hear about more and more how afraid people are, and how much the powers that be are doing to try and solidify their own power. And so the common perception is, oh, we're screwed. They're going to take over our lives. And it's important to remember, just because you perceive them making a power grab doesn't mean it's because they feel like they're in power. If I was in power, I would want you to view me as being all powerful. I would want you to view me as being in total control of you being a victim, because there's no way I can have that much power over the world. The world's too big. There's too many influences. There's too many players, right? So I would want you to view me that way, straight up. But the other point is that if I was in power and I was suddenly making big moves to establish more power, that's not me making power moves. That's me desperately scrambling, because the system that I created over decades is falling apart, right? Like the rise of cryptocurrency, again, is a perfect example. The powers that be aren't happy about that. They can't control it. They're trying, but then more cryptocurrencies pop up. I mean, look at this whole thing with identifying transactions over $10,000 on Bitcoin. Well, that's great for Bitcoin. What about Ravencoin, which trashes the address as soon as you send a transaction? It's designed to be anonymous. What's the system going to do about that? Right? So it can't compensate for everything, but it tries. And so we're just watching that. But it's important to remember that it's not what it appears to be. It's not that the system is getting more control. It's that they're losing control, and they're trying desperately to solidify that control because they don't know what the future holds. You know, I actually have a kind of a fun theory if we're talking about ripples and vibrations and common mentality. Have you noticed that all these billionaires seem to really want to get off the planet lately?
They have, yeah.
I think it's because we're growing. Their place isn't here. They're feeling more and more out of place. There's nowhere else to go, right? That mentality it's not going to survive into the future. It just won't.
Yeah, I can't remember if before the first episode we decided that COVID was a topic we were going to stay off of. Okay, should we stay off of it, you think?
Yeah. And the only reason, and I want to say, okay, we'll include this in the podcast. The reason that we don't get into the coronavirus conversation is quite simply because there's too much rhetoric on each side. It's just that both sides of the argument are exaggerating for the point of making their point. And so, like the other day, I was saying that comparing a mask mandate to Nazi Germany is a lot like comparing coronavirus to smallpox. They're both exaggerations. right? Coronavirus is not smallpox. It doesn't kill 30% of the population, right? And a mask mandate isn't that big of a deal. At the end of the day, you're just being asked to be more considerate around people who may be panicking or afraid that they're going to catch something. That's really not that big a deal. I mean, we do things all the time for the sake of consideration. We create bike lanes on the road. Like, it's really not that big a deal. I mean, you can complain, oh, you're crowding my car, but I mean, it's safer for the bikers. And so we can see that. And so we just do it. But until we can get to a point where we're talking about this honestly, and more importantly, until we can get to a point where the argument is absent of monetary incentive, there's really no argument we can have that's going to go anywhere, because there's too much vested interest in either side being right. There's too much vested interest in the other side being wrong. And until then, until we can actually just come to the point where we're all on an equal playing field and deciding what's best for us as a species, what's best for me as an individual, and what are the actual facts? What is the decision that I'm making here? It's very difficult to have this conversation. And I mean that because there's no transparency. As with everything in the system, there's just no transparency. I'm not saying get vaccinated, and I'm not saying don't get vaccinated. What I'm saying is that it's a personal choice, but that it's important to remember that we can't compare apples and oranges. You can't compare the current vaccine to previous vaccines, and you can't compare the current pandemic to previous pandemics, because everything is different. The society that we're in is different. The virus itself is different. Our means of living day to day has changed. We can work remotely now. That changes the playing field. Like, the argument that everybody should be getting back to work now that we've got this under control is, again, the result of an inherent bias in the system to get us go out and driving the economy again. So until we can come to terms with all of these influences, it's very difficult to have this conversation.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think something else that has always been a part of my life and questioning and things is just when it comes to, political conversations, just the idea that I feel like with our conversations, it's like a separate sort of thing. And I think we're able to see, because I feel like everyone feels a need to identify with a certain side, or feels a need to identify someone else in a certain side. And because of this polarization, which I think, I see in the US, has gotten very polarizing, especially in the last 10 years or so. It's gotten kind of out of control to a degree. And I think with our conversations, like, we're just able to see that both sides had, like, the understanding through which they come to ideas is flawed. Like, the root of it is flawed. So that means that no matter what side comes out of that sort of root is going to be flawed. So both sides have some things that are maybe, best or whatever, but both sides also have things that they're vastly incorrect about. Like, both sides, like, it's all, there's things on both sides. And I see this very often, that people almost won't even have an opinion on something until they know what their side's opinion is on it. And I find it fascinating that we almost have waited. And I notice this all the time now with crossing the street stoplights in New York. Like, I never wait for the walk sign. Like, I look both ways, no cars, I walk. There's a crowd of people on the corner, like, just kind of standing there. And I'm like, this is becoming almost like you're not in control. Like, you are allowing everything else, like everything where it's always like a give and take, but it's more and more, that lack of need for awareness and just allowing everything else to do everything for you. And it's like, we're getting to that with cars, like autonomous vehicles, just being able to sit there. And so I find it, anyway, going back to that with like the polarization of, the political spectrum. I don't think we need to get too deep into this realm, but I just find it fascinating that a lot of times I'll see people not have an opinion or have their own personal opinion, and then they hear what their side has, and all of a sudden they completely change it, and they're like very aggressive on the other side, and they will deny ever having the other opinion because their side doesn't agree with that. I just find that to be very fascinating, and just the groupthink aspects of it, and the lack of, I don't know, a degree personal responsibility and whatnot. And I'm seeing it more and more. It's just like, especially being in a place like New York, there's just so much going on all the time that I'm noticing more and more of. It's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, well, it's the rhetoric, right? Like the rhetoric is what's dangerous on both sides. And see, my perception on the whole thing is this, and I avoid the conversation because, in all honesty, it's not a conversation you can have rationally most of the time, right? But if you wanted to be vaccinated because you have concerns about your health, perhaps that you don't watch your health most of the time, or perhaps you're in an age range where you're at a greater risk, and you think that it's going to buoy your immune system and allow you the opportunity to protect yourself better. That's fine. That's a personal decision, and I think that that's a decision that you should make depending on the considerations within your life. But then when we look back at, say, the actual, say, mortality rate or the actual hospitalization rate, and we realize that it's only high for certain age ranges. It's only high for certain people with certain medical conditions or multiple medical conditions. And so those people should consider the vaccine with an entirely different lens than, say, somebody who is 20 to 30 years old with no prior medical conditions. That person may not feel that the vaccine is in fact their best bet against beating the virus, that they may in fact think that their immune system, because of their age, because of their medical history, because of the way that they live, the way that they eat, or whatever it is, they just feel that that's the better bet, the better bet for going against this coronavirus. That person should be able to make that decision based on those considerations as well. But what we're doing, as we've done with everything, is just say, here's a solution, it applies to everybody, and if everybody's doing it, then we're good to go. And we're taking out everybody's personal responsibility in making their own choice. We're taking out informed consent, right? Which is the entire point, is that we've created something for you that's a tool that's going to help protect you. Do you want to use it? It's not you must use it, because that argument doesn't even make sense. It would make sense if the vaccine stopped transmission. It would make sense if the vaccine stopped transmission. It would make total sense that you are putting people at risk if you're not vaccinated, because you're carrying around a virus that you could otherwise get rid of. But the vaccine doesn't stop transmission, and it doesn't kill the virus. It's not like the smallpox vaccine, right? It's not the same thing at all. So vaccinated people are still carrying the virus. They've admitted this. So if vaccinated people are still carrying the virus, why are unvaccinated people the danger? Because an unvaccinated person, if they get sick, they're going to show symptoms for the most part. So we're going to be able to identify that they're sick, that they have coronavirus. But a vaccinated person doesn't show symptoms. So now you've got people who are vaccinated, have breakthrough cases, and they're spreading it around the world, and nobody knows, nobody could tell. Right. So all we've really done is made it so that way certain people are allowed to carry the virus. That's what we've done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the arguments I hear with it are always that, you're not being considerate of everyone else. But as you just mentioned, it's like, it's always just nitpicking to fit your agenda, whatever side that you're on, to fit your narrative, and just willfully leaving off very, very important details on the side of whatever side you're trying to take, like the details on the other side, that it's just like there's no give and take anymore, or no, I don't know, active communion in any of this. It's just, my way or the highway on both sides. And it's, I think, yeah, with especially just with the narratives that I see on, I mean, I don't have a TV, so I don't really watch anything, which I've been told is my first world white privilege, not having a TV and not, having to watch the news. But, I let those slide. But yeah, it's fascinating, just the narratives that you see and how they evolve, even from where they begin with, to, deepen what they want to happen in a certain way.
Absolutely. Well, and they know human nature, right? Like we've been marketing and we've been building the PR side of things for like 100 years. We know very much how humans interact with one another. And admittedly, when COVID first came out, when there was word of it spreading, nobody knew anything about it. And so there was justifiably a response of fear and panic because nobody knew anything about it. Nobody knew what it was. We were getting word that it could transmit over tabletops, and that it would jump from people. Like, it was just it was all a bunch of uncertainty, and so everybody panicked and everybody kind of locked down. And that's fine. That makes sense. That is an appropriate response, in my opinion, to something that's potentially fatal. But then it was, okay, well, it's actually, okay, it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that, but just stay afraid, just stay panicking. And it didn't matter how much new information was coming out of it. It was still, nope, this could kill you. This could kill you. I heard, dear God, it was Jon Stewart who compared coronavirus to Hitler. And it's like, really? Like, don't you think that's a bit extreme? And what's funny is that he was doing it in derision to make fun of the people who are anti-vax, comparing the vaccine mandate to Hitler. And it's like, okay, but neither coronavirus nor the mandate are Hitler. Let's make this perfectly clear. There's a very big difference between those things and killing millions of people. And that's what I mean about the argument going nowhere, right? Is that as soon as you're in that kind of rhetoric, you're not talking rationally anymore. You're just dealing with one side of fear versus the other side of fear. And that's all it is, right? So it comes down to the fact that we have to just come to terms with the fact that it's still a personal choice to live or die. That is the point. At the end of the day, my life is mine. If I want to put it at risk, whether it's skateboarding, bungee jumping, or getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine, that's up to me. It always has been up to me. But the argument that we're having collectively right now, which is very, very dangerous, is that the collective informs the individual rather than the individuals create the collective. It goes against everything that the United States was meant to symbolize and start, was that we're a nation of free people creating a country, as opposed to a country telling us how to live, right? It's the exact opposite. We're going back towards, fascism and dictatorship. We're going back towards irresponsibility, which is the problem that we've been having more and more over the last several decades. And so, like we've been saying, this conversation is a big part of how we are going to change as a culture going forward, because this conversation is all about living in the gray area. We don't want people to decide one way or another, which is why we've avoided this conversation about coronavirus for 12 episodes, is because we don't choose a side. We're not even choosing a side here. We're not telling you one way or another what you should do. We are saying that it's your right to choose one way or another, and that only your right to choose is the point, because you can't tell other people what to do and expect them to do it. You just can't. And if you're going to do that, then you can't complain when there's conflict and people calling you a fascist or a dictator. That's just how it goes. And likewise, for people who are anti-vaccine, it's okay to make the choice that you don't want to have a vaccine. You don't have to go to the extremes of saying that, it's going to kill you. If you get it, you're an idiot. If you get it, you're subjecting to the system. You're a sheep. You can be a rational person and still believe in medical technology. There's not a problem with that. You can question medical technology, or you can believe in it. It's the same argument we've been having for years. It's like OxyContin, right? At one point, OxyContin was introduced by the pharmaceutical companies as, it's going to save people. Look, it's a wonder drug. And then all of a sudden, we have teenagers that are committing suicide and are getting hooked on this right away, right? And it's like anything else. It's a pharmaceutical drug. There's a profit behind it. You have to weigh the pros and the cons. You have to weigh the risks for yourself and decide if it's more harm than help, or vice versa. And in doing that, you decide the path of your life. But that's all this argument should be about. That's all it should be. Like, if there is medical technology that's available and you're afraid and you believe the technology works, use it. You shouldn't be ridiculed for that. On the other hand, if you don't want to use it, you shouldn't be ridiculed for that either.
Yeah, I find it very fascinating just when it comes to judgment. And I see it a lot, tying it into spiritual community, the spiritual ego and whatnot, and people like acting a certain way and judging people because they aren't, as awake as them or as woke as them or whatever. And I just find that so funny. And I, at the same time, I find it to be an interesting paradox, because I like that you can take it as far as you want. So like say there's someone acting a certain way who's just like, someone labels them as a sheep, and then there's like a spiritual person who comes along and says how they are just so asleep at the wheel, they don't see what's going on, whatever. But then if someone else comes along and is like, I also see that, but I don't judge them, and then they start judging the spiritual person for having an ego, and then there's like another person who's like judging that person, and it's like this vicious cycle that could go on forever until you realize that they're all you. And then there is no judgment to be cast. But I find it very fascinating, and like until you see fully that you are them, and you are like, you're them. And if even though it feels like maybe you're not, if everything was traded, you would be doing the same thing. You would be making the same judgments. You would be acting the same way as the initial person, all of these things. But I find it very fascinating on both sides of things, the judgment, or even, the people who are personal choice and, anti-vaccine or whatever, then judging people for wearing a mask. And it's like, that's not affecting you at all. Why do you give a shit if they're wearing a mask inside?
What happened to choice?
Exactly. I find that to be the hypocrisy across the board when it comes to, and I responded in a Q&A on Instagram about that once, the idea of people who are, pro-choice or not in certain ways. Like both sides have people, certain topics they are pro-choice on, but across the board, you may be pro-choice on your thing that your side agrees on, when it comes to having take the vaccine, you're pro-choice. But then when it comes to something the other side is pro-choice on, like something like abortion or drugs, then all of a sudden you're not pro-choice. And then on the other side, you're pro-choice with abortion and drugs. On the other side, you're not pro-choice when it comes to vaccine. And it's like, is anyone taking a step back here and seeing how fucking hypocritical all of this is? Like, you can't have one without the, like, it blows my mind. And I think I responded to a Q&A because a lot of people ask me like my thoughts on vaccine and COVID. And a lot of times I stay out of it, but sometimes I'm like, I'll get into it. And I started that one with like, I don't mean to ruffle everyone's feathers here, but everyone's a little bit hypocritical when it comes to a lot of these topics.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm focused on myself and how I feel about things. And so that's really all I see. And until that stops being true, I can't talk to you about anything, right? I'm just going to continue to self-validate it. There's nothing I can do about that. But yeah, it's interesting. And admittedly, like, to our listeners who are probably wondering why we haven't discussed COVID up until now. Quite honestly, it's because of the system that we live in. It's because of the world that we live in. And it's such a dangerous conversation to have, which is really the point, right? It's really the problem at the end of the day, is that it is a minefield to get into this conversation. There is a consideration in having this conversation in how quickly people become vilified for even just questioning what is happening. Like, look at what recently happened with Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah was doing a report on the Omicron strain, and he mentioned that medical professionals are finding Omicron is less harmful to us. It's an easier strain for the immune system to handle, though it is easier to transmit. And the CEO of, I think it was Pfizer, came out and they're like, well, no, don't worry. The vaccine's you really need the vaccine. The vaccine's definitely going to help you. You got to keep taking the vaccine. And Trevor Noah's response was, maybe the person who's getting, $100 million paycheck out of this isn't the person that we should be listening to in terms of, what's best for our body. That's all he said, was that this person has a bias. Well, he just got called out by everybody. Like, they just went for his head. And it was just because he was questioning the dominant narrative that was being invested in by people who were afraid, and people who are afraid always look for somebody to point the finger at, right? That's a common trait. When we're afraid, we want to blame somebody for our fear, right? When we're afraid, we want to point the finger. And then that's what ended up happening. It was just the act of questioning is enough to have you branded as a disturber of the peace. And that's largely why we don't talk about this on here. That's why we haven't been getting into this conversation, because while we're building this, while we're doing our thing, I still need a job.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel it. And yeah, at the end of the day, like as important it is to discuss all of these things, there are certain things that people's perceptions just come into. And, that's why I'm not maybe posting a video about religion every single day. I dabble in it here and there, and it's fun to do it sometimes. But if I did it every day, it would just be kind of a headache. And it's like, there is a give and take and an upside and a downside that you're able to see with everything. And as important as it is, I think, for people to question everything, I think there's a level that I feel comfortable with, and that level grows and grows every day pretty much. But it's still like, yeah, I could post about it every day, but I don't. We could talk about these things every podcast episode, but we don't. It's not necessary. And there are just so much identity involved in these conversations. And the more identity that gets involved in things, the I don't know, a little bit more careful you have to be, quite frankly. And the amount of time you have to spend just wondering if it's worth your effort and energy. And we've gotten through a lot of stuff without discussing this in 11 episodes. So I think we're doing just fine. But I had a guy last week on my podcast who does food content. We were talking about, hate comments and whatever. And I'm like, how do you get any hate comment? You post food that's like slightly healthier than the original thing to help people promote a healthier lifestyle and potentially make it easier for them to lose weight if they so want to, or just eat really good food that's a little bit healthier for them. And he's like, yeah, well, when it comes to food, people are closely, and we got to the point of discussing identity and how closely identified they are with their food. And especially when it comes to cultural foods is where he gets the most like hate comments, because he'll make it in a way that is not the typical way that people make it, so that it's, a little bit healthier. He swaps out a couple things here and there, still tastes really good. But, even he gets comments on there like, this is so wrong. Like, who do you think you are? And it's like, he's making food recipes out here. Like, you got to be shitting me. Like, this is insane. But yeah, it comes back to identity, and when people are very much identified with a side, and I think that comes into politics a lot, and religion and food here and there. But the closer people identify with something, and the more fear that they have, like providing that identity, or kind of underlying fear they have that goes along with that identity, that if they were to question it, a lot of overwhelming fear would come into their life, the more angry they get when you question it. Because I was actually something else. My cousin follows me on TikTok. I actually sent her our podcast because I think she'd really like it, but she is not religious, has kind of gotten out of that. And I noticed she commented on one of my religion videos, and I was texting her about identity and how everyone has a little bit of doubt when it comes to certain beliefs. And they just, like, everyone has that little bit of doubt. And if you question that doubt, they get very angry about it because they don't want to question it. So when it gets questioned for them, they don't want to go down that route. And it leads to them coming at you and your character because you are doing what they are afraid of doing. Because again, that high level of fear comes in as soon as it's questioned, and as soon as their doubt gets blown up a little bit, all of a sudden they become very afraid because they are relying on that to settle their fears.
Yeah, and that's the real pandemic at the end of the day. Like, if we're going to talk about the real plague that humanity is going through, it's this investment in our certainty that's just gotten out of hand. And then that's all it is. And I think that is the real problem. Pandemic, economy, climate change, all of that aside, how we deal with all of those problems are distorted by our overinvestment in identity and certainty, right? Until we can address that, until that tide starts to change in our society, we're always going to end up in these childish arguments with people who aren't even able to see what we're arguing about, because their own value is wrapped up in it, right? They won't have ears to hear, right? It's like in Isaiah, they say, you'll have eyes, but you will not perceive. You'll have ears, but you will not hear. It's exactly the point, right? Is that it's like we're speaking different languages, and it's because our focuses are different. If I'm focused on my illusion, everything that comes through is twisted by that illusion. Doesn't matter what it is, right? And until I can see past the illusion, I can't hear you. I can just hear my interpretation of you. And that's what we need to work on, which is why, again, this podcast is so good in terms of not choosing a side one way or another. We're not advocating against society or the system. We're not advocating for the system. We're talking about being reasonable in the establishment and the maintenance of that system. We're talking about being realistic in how big that system can be and how much influence it should have over our life. Like, all we're ever talking about in this is being reasonable, living in the gray area, taking responsibility and maintaining a state of awareness, so we're not getting overly caught up and spreading this plague of ego, as it were, without meaning to. And as soon as we can come to that terms, or to that point, well, then all of a sudden the ripples that we're making change. They change entirely. And all of a sudden, those people who at one point couldn't hear us realize that the sound has changed that's coming through their illusion. Like, they can see there's something that's not working the same way. That's the one thing I've definitely realized in my life, is that as I'm less involved with my ego and I talk to people who are still looking at me through theirs, they don't respond the same way to me because I'm not responding the same way to them. And so all of a sudden, it's like what I'm doing is so out of alignment with the illusion that they're invested in that they have to question the illusion. They're like, why isn't this fitting? Why doesn't this person care that I'm judging them? Like, why doesn't this person care that I keep trying to, put them down to validate myself? Why are they still smiling? And stuff like that. And it's just all of a sudden it has a ripple because it makes them uncomfortable enough to question their perception. That would never happen if you were to go, question your perception. Why don't you see it? They won't listen to you. They can't, right? Because you're making it about you instead of allowing them to make it about them.
Yeah, certainly. And I think when it comes to, the communication of these ideas and perceptions, I think I really enjoy that we're, expressing all of these things, because something else I wanted brought up was I listened to at least like the audiobook version of the Gospel of Thomas, and it was like I resonated with a lot of it, but like a lot of them were still, I was like, I could maybe see where he's coming from with this one, like just because I understand these things, that we talk about these things so much. But like, 5-6 months ago, a year ago, like none of this would have made any sense whatsoever. But at the same time, I think there's like there's an infinite amount of ways that someone could perceive it, but there's kind of like two main ways, like the literal or the metaphorical. And if you take it literally, I think that's where Christianity was sort of built, was all of his messages were taken literally, and they were never meant to be taken literally. So I was able to understand, because I knew they weren't literal going in, so I wasn't even trying to understand them literally, but I could see, I was like, oh, that's where Christianity got that sort of thing. And it's like, how did they take that to be literally? And that's why so many things don't make sense, and we have so many, like, I don't know, silly stories out there, because the way that he spoke, the way that Jesus spoke, was very much, I don't think, supposed to be taken literally. But if you take it literally, it comes out with some crazy stories. But at the same time, like, even where I'm at right now, I was not able to fully grasp everything he was saying. I would have to go back and listen a few times, and if I wasn't paying very close attention, it was no chance whatsoever.
For sure. Well, and there's such a big gap in language, right? Like, we're talking about a scroll that was literally, found and has been translated, but it's not like it was intact, right? So we're doing the best we can with essentially an almost dead language, trying to interpret it into English and the symbolism and the metaphors that we would use. And so it's very difficult. It's kind of like reading the Tao Te Ching, right? Like, depending on the translation of that book that you find, it will mean an entirely different thing to you, right? Like I've read translations where, reading The Archer, which is probably one of my favorite passages of that book, I walked away going, what? Because it wasn't translated by somebody who understood what the hell they were talking about. They were just translating the words as they understood them. They didn't have the understanding of what the message was, right? Which is always the point. Like I've had people all the time come to my videos and they'll quibble about a word that I used or an expression that I used. And it's like, well, that's not quite accurate. It's like, nothing. It's language. Of course it's not accurate. The question is the meaning coming across? Or are you allowing the meaning to come across? Or are you quibbling on the words to avoid the insight? Are you quibbling on the words to make it about me rather than what I'm saying? Right. And that's always the case. All of our stuff gets twisted by that. Even this podcast, I guarantee it.
Yeah. Everyone has their own unique perception. And so there's no way. And I made a video today just about, that idea, which we've talked about a bunch, that, there's multiple versions of you that exist inside of everyone's mind. So like, why try and live based on all of those versions? It's completely futile and impossible, quite frankly. Like it logically doesn't make any sense to live based on that because you can't. There's only one of you, but everything that you ever say or communicate gets twisted by people's perception. So for us talking about things that, very much aren't words, reality isn't words. It's not the easiest thing to express in words because it's never does it justice. And we can only do our best to communicate it. And, if people have ears to hear, great. But at the same time, like I don't feel too much pressure to feel like I'm responsible for their perception as well. Like that is their call. And if they get it, great. If not, that's okay too. It'll come. But when you brought up Alan Watts, I was actually wanted to talk about him for a sec, because to me, it seemed like, especially more recently listening to his stuff, because I was listening to his stuff like, I don't know, the last few years. And only recently did it really start to click more. Like there was a while where I would listen to it and I was like, I don't really know what he's trying to, like what he's saying here. Like it was too much for me, but now it all very much makes sense. So to me, it seems like he was someone who really got it. But at the same time, like people talk about him, and I've seen his daughter interviewed talking about how, he was a big drinker and he understood that this was all a play and a game and like very much not serious at all. So like there's absolutely nothing wrong with like drinking all the time. But at the same time, do you think, and you've mentioned this too with like Jim Carrey, how it seems like he got it, but it maybe has maybe lost some of the luster that he had a little while ago. Do you think that it's just because you always, for situations like that, like you have to stay sort of on the ball, and as soon as you start wavering from that, or bringing in sort of more identity into it, it can, I don't know, shield or fog up that sort of clarity to a degree. So I was curious your take just on both of those people, because they're two people who I have, a lot of respect for and have listened to a ton of their talks and speeches just about these concepts for a while.
I think that's interesting because it kind of follows up what you were saying about not, if you get it, great, right? If you don't get it, that's on you. I'm just out here throwing seeds. And it took me a long time to get to that point, because when we're talking about this stuff, as you witnessed last week, when you talk to God, as it were, all of a sudden you come out of it with a whole other level of responsibility, with a whole other perspective of what's happening. You feel yourself connected to everything else around you. And so you want to go and talk to people about this. You almost feel like this responsibility to participate, right? And unfortunately, that responsibility can end up feeling very serious, and that seriousness can take its toll on you. And so this is why I always say it's so important to keep it light. It's really important to keep it light. And it's because you can become hyper aware of your ego and learn to keep it compartmentalized, but then never get over it. you're always just compartmentalizing it. Like, oh, that's my ego self. This is who I am when I'm not identifying as that. And it's just constant work. It's the constant work of not identifying with my self-image, including as a teacher, including as, somebody who's enlightened or aware or anything. I mean, there can't be an intention to this conversation. And as soon as you have an intention, it loses all of its fun. It loses all of its energy and its enthusiasm. And that is the danger in becoming a public speaker. That's the danger in having this conversation and even doing this podcast, is the idea that you start to take yourself too seriously and you start to take your role in the whole and in this ripple too seriously. And it just becomes another religion, right? It becomes another discipline, and it can't be, because that's not how we want to live, right? It's really not. And so when you do take it that seriously, it's very, very difficult to shed that. Like, it's funny, you almost learn to shed one weight, but then you end up carrying the weight of everything as a result. And if you're doing that, it's because you have an idea of that everything, and you're still holding on to it, which is what we were saying earlier, is that things are never what they appear, right? Things are never what they appear to be. And that insight in itself will bring you straight back to reality, right back to uncertainty in the present moment. Doesn't matter what your narrative is, doesn't matter what you think is happening. There's way more involved. It doesn't matter what the superficial is. There are infinite layers behind it. And as soon as you're willing to accept that, you end up back in the present, where you're not in control and there's no weight to carry, right? But it's really important to remember that, is that things are not what they appear. And I think in terms of Alan Watts' lifetime with the Vietnam War and everything that was happening with the hippie movement and everything else, there was a big push for kind of like a new renaissance in consciousness. And a lot of people put pressure on Watts to be something that I don't think he ever really wanted to be. And I think that he started to take that on to some degree, which is why later in his life, he took off and went and spent some time in the woods, right? He was just like, no, I need to go. I need to look at the squiggly for a bit and get away from all of this. And I think that helped him. I found he started laughing a lot more again, right? It wasn't quite so cerebral, but that's the point, is that if it starts to get serious, it's because you're creating weight, right? You're investing in a narrative of yourself or the world. It doesn't matter, but you're still creating another illusion, even if that illusion is based on your recognition of truth.
Yeah. I find that just all the time when I start getting caught up in things, I just remember that they're just perceptions of how things are, and it's always here now. And that, I think, is the most beautiful thing about all of this that we talk about, is it's you're never missing anything. It's always here now. So you think, you missed a certain opportunity to be present. It's like, this is the opportunity. The moment you're thinking that you're missing the opportunity of being present, you're being present in that moment, and it's here now, always. So whenever I start getting caught up in like feeling a certain way, I just remember that I'm aware of that feeling. I'm aware of that perception. I am aware of that thought. I'm not that thought. I'm not that perception. I am not that feeling. I am just the awareness of it. I am everything and nothing. I am nowhere, or now here. And it's a constant thing. Like, cause I do get caught up all the time in that. And it's just about remembering, oh yeah, there's another perception. There's another thought that I'm having. And the more that I catch it, the easier it becomes every single time. It's like, it is very much a practice, and it's never that they're never going to be there, but that's part of this experience. It's part of being human. And I think something that I've learned throughout is just to not judge myself along the way. Like, if I do get caught, and I talk about this a lot in our workshops and stuff too, it's like, because I will get caught up in certain, perceptions of myself and judgments of myself. And no matter what thing I'm doing, if I get caught up in judgment and then I start judging my judgment, that's just doing the same thing. And I can break that cycle by not judging my judgment in that moment, and being okay, allowing myself, the grace and the slack, cutting myself some slack, and understanding that this is by design the way that things are. Like, it's for the experience. It's not about enjoying every moment. It's about experiencing every moment, and enjoyment and good and bad and negative feelings are all just perceptions. They are never the truth. Everything just is. We're just experiencing things every single moment. And there is no single moment. It just is. It's eternal. It's right here and now, always. So it's like no matter how deep you go into belief systems or identification or perceptions, it's always that one step of becoming aware of what you're doing and realizing that you're here now and that's it.
Yeah. And what's funny is that, so we talk about, God or the recognition of unity and that impression of infinite intelligence that goes with that, or the experience of infinite intelligence that goes with that. And that feeling has inspired people for, thousands of years to go out and try to spread the word of God in one form or another. And not realizing it, that form of spreading the word is actually doing the opposite, right? It's forcing, it's controlling, it's creating an idea, it's perpetuating an identity. So if anything, spreading the word of God is doing the work of the devil, if you want to look at it that way, right? It's sowing doubt, it's sowing control, it's sowing ego. So the real work of devotion to God is exactly what you're saying. It's the constant act of letting go. It's the constant act of being present. It's the constant act of coming back to reality, to be in God, right? And that's what spreads. That's what changes the world. And people are so keen to get an idea of what's my life purpose. I want to align with source energy. I want to align with God. I want to create a new world, a new earth, right? 5D, whatever you want to call it, right? It's like, great, stop trying to do that. Now you're doing it. Right. And that's the counterintuitive part, is that we want to change the world, but the world will change automatically the more present we become, right? Because the world we live in is a result of how not present we are, right? And that's it. So it's a one-step process, not just individually, but collectively. It's just doing it over and over and over again in the one moment that is existence.
Yeah. And that whole idea of the new earth or 5D, like those are very obviously just more ideas and perceptions and belief systems. Like it's just shifted from one thing to another, but it's a belief in, the greater goodness and trying to change. And it goes back to, being the change versus trying to change everything, and understanding that, like we were talking about last week, when someone's smoking a cigarette and someone tells them not to, like, yeah, smoking a cigarette might not be great for you, but telling people how to live also isn't great for you. So it's like, as much as, but that's what people think when they think of, changing the world. They're like, I have this understanding that cigarettes are bad, so I need to spread it out to everyone. Or I have this understanding that we are all unity, so I need to force everyone else. And I think there's a difference, between us having conversations like this and making videos as, dropping seeds or pointers or whatever, just sharing it. Like, I don't advertise my videos as being advice or trying to help people. Like, when people ask like why I do it, I just like, I like making videos and sharing things. Like, it's not even that and sometimes I'll say like, yeah, I enjoy, helping people because I see myself in them, and I know what it was like going through extreme bouts of, social anxiety and whatnot. So I'm on the other side now. So of course I want to share things that helped me get there, but it's not, the intention isn't having the goal of helping someone. It's just sharing things, because all I know at the end of the day is understanding this helped me. If it helped me and I share it, odds are it'll probably help someone else, but it's not the expectation that I have going into it. And if it doesn't help a single other person, that's okay too. They can leave it be. Now, I'm not forcing anyone to follow me. I'm not forcing anyone to watch the video or like it or comment or anything. It's all up to them. And if they feel like it, cool.
That's right. This is me just taking care of my part of what is. Carry on, unless you'd like to get involved, in which case, cool. Welcome to the party. Right. And that's it, is people have to decide for themselves. And we want people to decide for themselves. We don't want this to be a sales pitch. We don't want to be like, hey, follow us, we'll lead you to God, because that's the last thing that anybody needs. It's just another idea of God, and just another idea that you don't know the way or can't find it yourself, right? And so it's just a conversation. It's just having it for the sake of having it, and people who want to participate will, or they won't. But what inspires me about this process and everything that we've been doing here is that we're coming up with ways to find or to create places for people to have this discussion, right? Like our Patreon is a good place. People come and they'll join us for our live streams or the free live groups that we do. People will come and they'll join in the conversation. And that's been super helpful to me and everybody who's been joining us. But now we have the Discord server that's coming out so people can connect with one another, not just you and I. And then, of course, later on, we're going to be doing other events. Like at some point, as this grows and we can start to put some financing into some other public events, things that actually draw people together that are not online, that's going to create new venues for insight. It's going to create new opportunities for change, more opportunities for people of like mind in the moment to just connect and allow things to spread on their own, right? And it's just to exercise that faith in themselves, which is essentially the point. So that inspires me that when I see this growing the way it is, when I see our YouTube channel consistently getting more views and our podcast getting more views and our TikTok channels getting more views and people commenting, not just viewing, but asking questions, wanting to be involved, wanting to participate in the conversation, that is the change that's happening, right? That's it. You're seeing it. It's just not happening as fast as we would like it to, or that we think it should. But again, things are never what they appear to be. It's happening a lot faster than we think, a lot faster. The revolution will not be televised, right?
Yeah. And the speed at which it changes is all just perception as well, right? It's all happening now. But yeah, something I really just enjoy about our platforms, and there's certainly a lot of other people who just enjoy creating content and just doing it for the sake of doing it, having conversations for the sake of having conversations. But I think something that kind of runs rampant in our society is having a reason for the doing, the means to an end, or ends to a means, or reason, or, ultimate goal of where they see something going. And I think we've so far very much stayed on the path of we chat every Monday for an hour or two and we record it and then we post it. And that's it. We don't have we name everything and I do the timestamps afterwards, based on what we talked about. We don't create those and then talk about those things. It all happens after the fact. And Ray names the episode after the fact, after we go back and figure out what the hell we just talked about for 2 hours. So keeping that in mind, it helps to keep things light, like you were mentioning before. And even for, just in my experience with things, I have more clearly understood, as I mentioned a few times, that I just really enjoy making content. I enjoy making videos. So I've been doing it more and more for the sake of doing it. And then inevitably things will happen. I know for sure that this is going to be in a much different place than it in a year from now than it is right now. And some people will label that as, we are attracting that and we have, law of assumption working in our favor because, we think these things are going to happen. But it's those things are just holding on to a belief or perception or want that stems from feeling separate. You have things that happen to you separately from everyone. And that's not the case. But the more that you do this and the more that we do this, and we are manifesting this thing here now, we are doing it as I'm saying these words simultaneously. There's no disconnect or separation in me, these words coming out and us having this conversation to us manifesting this sort of community. It's happening right now as we speak. So I think that's one of, the coolest parts about it is we have no expectation. Even in our workshops too, we have a topic and that's about it. It's there's nothing more. We don't prep really beforehand. You keep your announcements and make sure to cover certain things. And I'm kind of there for the conversation and it goes. And I think both of our workshops have gone, incredibly well. I think they'll provide a lot of people with a lot of value over the next, years and years to come. So, and it's also kind of weird that we're not doing a workshop tomorrow. It's like been on my schedule for the last 2 months. But they'll be back soon enough. But yeah, I just really enjoy how light we keep things and how this is just conversation for the sake of having a conversation. There is no expectation and no inherent need that we feel like we need to get out of it as well. It's just doing for the sake of doing.
Exactly. Which is why it's so effective, right? In my opinion, it's the reason that it comes across so clearly is because we're not bringing our intentions into it. Like, I'm not trying to create a new world because whatever mentality I'm in right now doesn't have the ability to comprehend what that future will be. Right? That's the point. I'm just in this part of that wave, right? As the wave crests and it builds, it's going to create itself as it goes. And so we're not trying to create anything in the future. We're not trying to create any kind of impact. It's just having it, right? We're just embodying the mentality that we're talking about during all of these events. And as a result, I find the events, the workshops especially, get really, really into the point without being all preachy and superior about it, right? Like, we're talking about it like we're weighing things together, like Krishnamurti used to say, right? I'm not a teacher. We're just talking about things that are important to both of us. And that's really it, right? I'm not teaching you anything. We're just discussing, and we'll see where it goes from there, right? And that's very much why I find this conversation to be so important, is because it is its own point, which is what life should be. Life should be its own point. And if that's the insight we're always embodying, if that's the point that we're always driving home, then this is doing everything that I could ever want it to do. And admittedly, we're just going to keep doing it because I've been doing it for 20 years by myself. It's neat to have, a partner in crime to do this with me. And now more and more people jumping on board and getting involved. And as a result, actually, before we get too far from this point, I just wanted to mention to everybody that season 2 is coming up in January, and we are going to be introducing a new segment, the Dualistic Unity Roundtable, where we will have 4, maybe 5 guests on per episode, and we're going to basically just go around on a topic, talk about it from everybody's different perspective, and see what kind of insights that we can find. So if you are a content creator, or if this is something that you would be interested in participating in, do go to our website at dualisticunity.com. You will find a menu item called Be Our Guest. Just fill in your information, let us know that you're interested, and we will get back to you. There's a number of dates that you can choose from. Just let us know what your availability is. Likewise, I just wanted to make an announcement because I actually went through and tallied up how much content we've created with this podcast. With this episode, we're at about 17 and a half hours of podcast alone. And then with our Patreon, we have over 8 hours of additional content on our Patreon page, and that just continues to grow. So we're rapidly approaching 30 hours of just conversation. It's just going to continue to build. And a large part of that is the enthusiasm of our listeners continuing to encourage us to keep going and submitting their questions, submitting their comments. And on a last note, the Q&A episode is coming up. So if you do have questions and you want us to address them, let us know and we'll get to them.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that episode. Those are always very fun because they're very targeted questions, and as much, value this may provide people and just us having conversations when it's more direct, it can be very cool as well. Just another avenue. And going back to like the doing it for the sake of doing it, I haven't posted it yet, but I filmed a video. I just walked around Washington Square Park. Isn't too far for me. It's one of the main parks, like pretty well known in New York, and it's always pretty busy, and there's basically a fountain in the middle, so it's like a circle, and I just walked around the circle filming myself for 3 minutes, which is basically the extent of a TikTok that it can be. And I just talked about the act of filming it. It was kind of like a meta video, and talked about how even though all of my videos are me walking around New York filming pretty much, I was talking about how I am walking around this fountain right now with my phone in front of my face, just like doing circles. And there are people all around, and they are probably having perceptions about me, potentially passing judgment, whatever, like this dude just holding his phone in front of his face. And I was talking about it in the sense of what we talk about a lot in the action of it and the doing of it. And I was talking about how, I've now filmed 1,000 videos probably walking around New York, but what I have found is that no one has ever come up to me while I'm filming anything and said anything about like, what are you doing, man? Like, why are you filming right now? Like, no one ever. I've probably passed thousands of people and it's never happened. And so I was talking about how the act in itself can be very beneficial if you deal with things like, even beyond social anxiety, just anxiety of sort of being in public and what people think of you, even just like walking around, which I know that people deal with a lot. So like through that, you initially will feel very uncomfortable when you're doing that. If you just hold your phone in front of your face and start talking, walking past people who are all sitting there kind of like just watching people walk by. So they're all probably passing some sort of judgment who, God knows what it is actually. But what I've found is sometimes I will be a tiny bit uncomfortable when I start. It's much less so now than it used to be when I first started doing it. But eventually you just keep doing it and the discomfort begins to settle more and more and more. And as you keep going, it just begins to settle. So I finished off talking about like when you are able to become comfortable in that feeling of discomfort, there's no more discomfort. And as discomfort arises, you can face it, which is the only way to truly qualm and settle those feelings. It begins to settle down. And then as it comes up, you face it, you get comfortable in it. And all of a sudden, there isn't really much discomfort left to have. And it's through doing it. So I kind of made a video talking about it while I was doing it. It was kind of like that meta sort of idea. But I think it can be incredibly helpful. And I've just been trying to film more of just like little rants about stuff, and especially something like that. And I'll probably just start filming more and just like, this is me walking through New York through a crowd of people, filming myself. Started out a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not as uncomfortable anymore. I can feel it settling as I'm speaking. Give it a shot if you have feelings like this.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not your typical sales pitch that our society would make, which is if you're uncomfortable around people, here are things that you can do to change your environment to make yourself less uncomfortable, right? What you're saying is, that's only going to last until you feel like you're out of control again. Go through the discomfort, find your balance. Suddenly discomfort's no longer something you have to fear. Be uncertain. Be completely honest about the fact that you really don't know anything other than you are here now. Everything else is a guess. Everything else is speculation at best, an assumption, which can be useful, can be very useful. Like if I'm going to build a house, I'm going to assume that the land I'm building it on isn't just going to collapse into a hole in the ground. It's totally possible, but I'm going to assume it's not because I'm trying to build the house, right? Now, if it did, well, at least I'm aware that anything could happen. So I'm not overly invested in that outcome, in that house being finished, right? It's a reasonable expectation that it's going to get finished, but heaven forbid, something could go wrong. That's all we're talking about. We're always just talking about being reasonable at the end of the day. We're just saying, just don't overcommit to any one end result making you happy. And you will pretty much always be in a state where happiness is possible.
Yeah. Something I keep coming back to the like crosswalk situation, but something I was thinking about was that beliefs, it's okay to have beliefs, and we always kind of have beliefs in things to a degree, but it's when we take them as truth and feel the need to defend them that it becomes, a sort of type of situation. So I was just thinking with the crosswalk thing, like you can either with the crosswalk have a belief in yourself and your eyesight, or a belief in the crosswalk signals. And having a belief in the crosswalk signals, that'll get you a certain place until there are other factors in play, like a car running through a red light. And all of a sudden there's a walk sign and you don't even bother trusting your eyes because you have all of your belief as truth in the crosswalk and in the stop versus walk sign. And as soon as that walk goes, you have your blinders on and you go, you get smacked by a car and you're dead. And if you only had that belief in yourself and that true faith in yourself, you don't even need a crosswalk. You can just look both ways. And whether it says walk or don't, you know you won't get hit by a car because you have that faith in yourself. And then you don't have to believe in anything outside of you. And I think that kind of ties into a lot of different types of situations because people like to put their beliefs in other things, but the only thing that it ever comes back to is all you ever have to realize, all you need to do is have that faith in yourself and you'll be just fine.
Yeah, right. Well, but with that goes the acceptance that we might die, right? Like we have to accept that. I mean, that's the biggest problem that we have in our culture for the most part is our resistance to the idea that people are going to die, right? Like we really just want to avoid that. Like we label styrofoam packing peanuts. Don't eat these. You know, if we're at that point, there are some people that maybe aren't going to make it. And I'm just saying that if they need instructions on not eating styrofoam, the chances of them making it very far are pretty slim. And we're not exactly helping them by making everything easier on them. They should have some challenges. They should maybe take a bite of that styrofoam and go, ugh, no, that's not a thing. And then they learn from it. But just telling people what to do and what not to do doesn't encourage them to be intelligent. It doesn't encourage them to be responsible. And it doesn't encourage them to make decisions that would promote long life, which is the problem. We're child-proofing everything. And as a result, we end up with a planet full of children.
Yeah. And that whole idea of allowing people to fail, like as usual, not going to name names, but, certain people in my life, I've had discussions about this, about, one person not really allowing someone else to fail and kind of doing things for them all the time with the fear that, they won't get to a certain place. And then, the years go by and they're still doing those things and feeling like they need to because they never allowed that person to learn that lesson 5 or 10 years ago. So now they still haven't learned that lesson because they didn't allow them to learn that lesson. So now they feel like they still need to do those same things because they never, but if they had just let them learn the lesson, then they wouldn't have to continue doing it. And some lessons are harder to learn than others. Some lessons really you feel like, the world's crashing down on you. But a lot of people, as long as, it doesn't kill this human you think you are, then, you're chilling. But a lot of people have to go through some shit like that and to really understand it. And if there's always someone there as their, safety or flotation device or something, then they're never going to learn that. And then they're always going to need a flotation device. And until they actually learn that. And then the more that happens, the more pressure and the more potential for a larger and larger quote unquote failure to happen. Whereas if you just allow them to kind of naturally occur and allow those failures, those smaller failures to happen, then they'll learn from that, but they're not going to learn from it by having that, flotation device next to them their entire life.
So true. There is another pandemic happening in our culture, and it's the rate of occurrences where children aren't leaving the home, that they're just staying into their 30s, and their parents, not wanting to view themselves as bad parents, are letting that happen, allowing them to just continue to wallow in comfort and not face any challenges and not face any discomfort and grow as a person. And then all of a sudden in their 30s and their 40s, they're completely irresponsible. They have no sense of personal value or meaning or accomplishment or anything. And they're wallowing through depression. They're wallowing through social anxiety. They're judging themselves. They're like, I can't tell you how many clients I've had who have gone through this, not just the person who's living at home, but the parents after the fact or during the fact going, I don't know how to deal with this. It's like, well, you kind of put yourself here. And you put yourself here by trying to avoid hardship and discomfort. It's like if you're in your early 20s, move out and get a roommate if you have to, or whatever, find a cheap, shitty apartment, do it the hard way. You'll learn from it. And at least then 10 years down the road, when you have a better apartment or you found your way into a different situation, you have some context there. Like you move into a slightly better apartment, and all of a sudden your old shitty apartment informs your perspective of your new apartment. All of a sudden you're like, woo, I have an extra bathroom, or oh my God, there's a room I can live in now, like aside from my couch. Things like that. These are all character building things. Not only that, but moving into the place, meeting your landlord, getting a job, meeting your bills, doing all that. I mean, these are all things that are unpleasant. Nobody wants to go through them in our society, especially because, as we mentioned at the beginning, it's kind of pointless, but you will learn about yourself through those things. You will learn how to grow as a person, how to face things when you don't know what's coming. And so if you're not actively out there trying to embrace that uncertainty, if you're not actively out there just challenging yourself, you're going to end up in a position where you don't have the strength when the challenge does arise in earnest. And that's something that I tell my daughter all the time. It's like, by a certain age, you should want to move out. And it's not that you can't come home. It's that you should want to try not to, just for your own sake. Right? If you fail, yeah, okay, come home. You know, it's the same if you don't have family to lean on. Often if you fail and you can't pay your rent, you will find a friend who will let you crash on a couch or something like that. But all of those experiences are vital to you recognizing exactly how much you can go through, exactly how much you can take, and exactly how much you can learn from those experiences. It's so important to do that. And we avoid it largely for our own reasons. I mean, admittedly, when you're comfortable at home, you don't want to leave. And when parents are invested in the idea that your happiness with them is indicative of how good a parent they are, that becomes toxic too, right? Because I love my daughter, and I am my daughter's friend whenever I can be, except when, you know, letting her off easy on something is actually hurting her in the long run, in which case I have to take it on myself to go, it doesn't matter if I'm liked or not for this. This is ultimately what's going to help her in the long run. And so I have to do that in myself. I have to face that insecurity in myself in order to do something positive, which is what we've been saying through this whole episode, right? Is that ultimately the cure for this disease of the ego is awareness and self-honesty, right? Vulnerability and the willingness to be uncertain and to just be where you are without some vested interest in evaluating yourself or some vested interest in getting somewhere. And that's what we're talking about. If the Dualistic Unity podcast is about anything, it's just clearing the distortion.
Yeah, I was going to bring up that idea of building faith in yourself, and just that whole scenario you just discussed. It's allowing the child to build the faith in themselves. And it was the same sort of example I was using as well, is that faith in yourself is so key. And when you go through something and you have to, you know, live in a shittier apartment than you're used to, or whatever, then you build that sort of understanding that you may build an understanding that you don't need as much as you once thought that you did, and you can survive without it. And especially if you go as far as like you did going into the forest, you really understand like, oh yeah, I have opportunities to like make money doing X, Y, and Z, but I don't need all of that because I know how I can live. And even, you know, you don't necessarily, people listening, have to go to extremes like that, but you can, if you take a step back and really just make a conscious effort to understand what you actually enjoy doing, like what actually brings you joy and happiness and peace in your day-to-day life. And you may realize that a lot of the things that you're striving for, a lot of the things that you want, a lot of those things that you think are, you know, peak success aren't what you actually want and aren't what you actually value. And then all of a sudden, you know, you're making X amount of money. It may feel like you're making more because you're not spending it on all the things that you have been told, you know, are the pinnacles of success, or show other people that you have value. Because, you know, like those billboards I put out in Soho, you are perfectly whole and complete exactly as you are right now. If you really understand that, there aren't as many feelings of lack where you feel like you need to spend all of this money, and all of a sudden you have more to do with things you actually enjoy, and maybe you can start living your life a little bit differently than you were. But yeah, I think there's the two sides of it, of understanding what you actually enjoy and value in your life, and then also understanding that you're also completely fulfilled here and now, always in the doing, as life experiencing itself. So through understanding those two key things, there's not nearly as much lack or sense of, desire to get all of these things in order to prove this value, because there's nothing to prove anymore. You have nothing to prove to anyone. You're already whole and complete.
Exactly. Exactly. And we'll wrap up here shortly, but I wanted to make a point based on what you were just saying, because recently had a discussion with somebody on one of my posts, and their point was very much that we have to expect people to live up to certain standards. We have to do our own inner work, but then we have to create organizations that demand other people within society agree with that work or also participate in that work. So coalitions against racism, coalitions against poverty, coalitions against government corruption, things like that. And while that's important and that's true, those coalitions, if filled with people who are egotistical, aren't going to do anything good, or at least not anything long lasting. And so the change has to be individual. It has to start with us, right? And that's the point, is that as people start to experience life, like you're saying, as they start to let go of the things that they don't really need, as they start to let go of the illusions that they used to think prop them up, those people make different decisions. They operate their businesses differently. They talk to one another differently. And as time progresses, they will raise their children differently, and their children will interact with their friends differently. And eventually society will start to emulate the mentality of that ripple as it spreads. And so just like with the legalization of cannabis, now in 10 years time, you're going to see people growing up outside of that prohibition who are now in politics, for example, and informing the political discussion without the paranoia that came from everything before, when the prohibition was happening on cannabis. That's going to change our attitude towards cannabis as a substance and as something that's useful to society. The same is true as we start to question our ego and start to question all of these enticing little baubles that society says are important to our value. That's going to change society too. All of a sudden, 20 years down the road, people who are invested in questioning themselves and finding that state of uncertainty and peace within their own existence are going to be making decisions that affect more people. They are going to be creating more sustainable ripples and more impactful ripples, because they will have all of that time behind them to refine their own peace. Right? That's the thing, is that if I were to talk to you when I was, let's say back in 2005, like that video, if I talked to you back then, you and I probably wouldn't get along to the same degree as we do now, because I was cocky, right? There was a lot of me in there, for sure, right? And so over time, how I've learned to live has informed how I've learned to speak. And that's informed how I've learned to interact with people in my business and otherwise. And that's changed everything. So we're always refining the ripple. It's just a matter of getting into the ripple. It's a matter of discovering, oh, right, I'm caught in an undercurrent. I can get out of that and ride the wave to shore, right? And that's very much what we're working on.
Yeah, I feel like it always comes back to getting yourself out of the way and allowing things to be and to flow. And yeah, it's interesting. So when you were back in 2005, would you I'm just curious, like what was causing you to feel that sort of cockiness? Was it the cockiness? Was it the realizations that you were having, and sort of because there was still some me in there, that it was like, I'm having these understandings, kind of that sort of thing?
There was definitely an element of that. So because I came out of so many years of devaluing myself, of basically putting myself down and giving myself no value whatsoever. And then all of a sudden they came out at the other end going, oh, wow, none of that's real. And I just felt so good for realizing it, that you start to identify with that new freedom, right? And so you could see it on my face when I'm talking in 2005. It's like, I'm going to educate you. And I was just like, it's brutal. Like, I can't stand watching that video just because I'm just like, oh, stop doing that. But the information's solid. Like, the insights I'm talking about are solid, but it's the way it came across. It's the way that I was looking at it from my own point of view that was distorting how much of what I was saying I was actually able to embody. And that was it. Right? Like, I look back at that video now and I go, that's a great point. Please stop saying it like that. Right? Like, just, you can say that without all of that attitude of, why aren't people getting this? It's so simple. And it's not simple. It's just that at the time, that's how I needed to perceive it, because I was very frustrated with the fact that I was the only person talking about it. amongst hundreds of people that I had interacted with. Like, it was so rare to talk to anybody about this. Like, we're having this conversation now, that it was very difficult to not go home and think to yourself, what a bunch of fucking sheep. Like, it was just very difficult not to do that. And of course, that's just me being egotistical. That's me going, but now I'm clear about it. I'm all good. And then you slowly start taking it in. It's like, right, but I wasn't always. Right. But that doesn't mean anything about me as a person. And so you start, that's why I always say there was a lot of me in it back then, whereas now there's very little me in it. And it's just because it's not mine. There's no me to take credit for any of this, right? I'm not saying anything that isn't always there. And so that makes it a lot easier to keep it light. It makes it a lot easier to kind of sit back and let people do their thing, because I'm not trying to teach anything. I know for a fact that if I never came into their existence, all they would need is themselves, and they'd find the same damn answers. They would find the same insights. And so that sets me free from a lot of things. I didn't feel that freedom back then. I was very much trying to change the world.
Yeah. So was it almost like you were having the understandings, but because there was still some me left in there, was it that you weren't seeing yourself as much in other people? Okay. So there was still, because of that, because that, for me, that's what's started to become clear very recently. It was just like very much seeing myself. So there's not really any other to judge, because they're all me. So it would, I find, and I still get caught up in that for sure. It's not to say that I never do, and I never, catch myself and whatnot, but the more, the deeper I go into this, and the more conversations that we have, and the more just experiences I have in day-to-day life, the more clear it becomes that, I am them, and they, things got traded. I would be them, and I am them.
Yeah, exactly. And this is easier when people are more similar to you as you currently are, right? When you meet people who are empathetic, for example, you're like, yeah, there I am, right? When you meet somebody who's abusing their power and hurting somebody as a result, it's very difficult to go, there I am, right? And that's what I was running across, is I was looking at the world like we've been talking about in this episode, and I was seeing the narrative that I was assuming. I was seeing the evil in the story that I was holding on to, based on the light that I was experiencing in myself. I could see all of the entanglements in the world around me, and it became, I got to address this, right? And so there was a vested interest in fixing it. There was a vested interest in the idea of what was best for everybody, and so of course that doesn't work, and it ended up driving those people that I was different from even farther away. I had to find a way to recognize that I'm not my idea of myself, even the positive end. And that's what I was dealing with back then. It was, I'm not my negative self, also not my positive self. That's the point, right? And I really had to get to that point. I really had to take into the fact that I'm Hitler. I mean, at the end of the day, that all of the evil that's ever been done was done by my awareness. All the good that's ever been done is likewise done by my awareness. And this is what Watts was saying. It's like, if you understand that black begets white, right, then you'll get this. And that's what confuses people. It's like, both sides aren't sides, right? They're the whole. We just see it as one side or the other. And so the deeper we get into that, the easier it is to see ourselves in other people. But it gets difficult when we're talking about monsters, because we look at the superficiality of the monster instead of the very long journey it took for that monster to become what they are. And then when you do that, you start to go, right, we were all that blank slate as a child. We were all in a position of vulnerability where our environment could have very much twisted us. It could have very much, sent us on a different path. And it's like you were saying, just recognizing that if I was to replace myself with you, Adam for Adam, I would be you. And that insight has a lot of layers, right? When you start getting past like, I would be Jesus, and I would be Buddha, and you start getting into the darker side of things, right? Then you really have to test your opinions and your preferences and your assumptions and your ideas of what's right and what's wrong and everything else that goes into the universe. It's like the Christian idea that, God is good and the devil is bad. It's like, there's no division. The devil is just the part of God you don't understand. And so that's very much it. So over time, I've just recognized that I have everything from the best of humanity to the worst of humanity in my awareness. And as long as I know that, I can deal with anybody from any mentality without judging them, which doesn't mean I have to condone them, but it changes how I interact with them.
Yeah, and I feel like that sort of, it's hard to have that understanding when you're tied into belief systems too, like actually seeing yourself in another and having that sort of true empathy when you have, very dualistic belief systems, like, a lot of religion and Christianity and
Morality.
whatnot. And yeah, like there is a sense of, oh, I would never do that. And it's like, what exactly would cause you to not do that if you had, their upbringing and their everything was interchanged? Like what else is there? What and
I'm a better
when I have
person.
those exactly when I have those conversations, it's people say like, oh well, it's my consciousness, it's my, being, my soul is not like them. And it's hard, it's hard, I think, for me to get past that with people and just, trying to explain that that's just another concept that's just another belief that you have. Like, what is, what's proving that? And, a lot of people, they just settle on saying it doesn't have to be proven or you can't disprove it. And I'm like, there's so many fucking things you can't disprove that doesn't prove anything. Like when I get that with, religious stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I also can't disprove that I have, or you can't disprove that I have, 17 toes right now until I take my sock off or anything like that. But yeah, so it's there are certain points where I'm just know when to stop, and I can see when people are just not willing to question anymore and they want to settle on an answer. And I've gotten better about not pushing it beyond that sort of limit that they want to feel.
And that's good. That's a good sensitivity to have, because if it's about you, nothing's getting through anywhere. Right? If they're threatened by you, they're not listening. They're not getting, it's nothing's happening there. You're just wasting your time spinning your wheels for nothing. You might as well just go and continue enjoying your life, and you'll run across somebody who might want to listen to you. Right. But, give them time, because I mean, I know if I were to go back to my 16, 17, 18-year-old self as who I am right now, I wouldn't listen to me. I know that. It wouldn't matter how good I am at talking about this. I was just not in a mentality where I could have heard it. Right. And give me some time. Right. And that's what happened. Enough time, enough hardship, enough lessons and opportunities to find those lessons. And my life changed. And so that's it. It's just putting yourself in the mix, waiting to see what comes out of it, and just continuing to do that until you're no longer afraid of the mix and you no longer hold on to anything coming out of it or going into it. You're just in it as it. You're a little Tasmanian devil constantly, right? That's pretty much it. And you're just causing whirlwinds, you're causing ripples, and you don't see them, you don't know where they're going, you don't know what they're going to do, but you know that the core that they come from is about as pure and vibrant and full of energy as possible. And that's it. That's the only faith we have to have, is in that state that we're in, because that's faith in ourselves. And that is, if anything, I would say, how we're going to see, the reemergence of God, as it were, because God is just a description for the whole, recognizing the whole. It's all it is, right? Like when we're talking about heaven, what are we talking about other than just awareness recognizing its nature, right, as everything? And that's it. And nothing to fear. Every fruit in the garden is yours, that kind of thing, right? It's like you were saying, walking around New York, it's like people are totally different. It's like people are totally the same. Your perspective of them is separate, is different, which means they're not anything you have to be afraid of anymore. They're not anything you have to judge anymore. They're not something outside of yourself. And so your interaction with them changes, your perspective of them changes, your mentality going into conversations with them changes. And that changes them. Not because it's deliberately changing them. That's the difference between control and influence, right? But because you are, in fact, a different aspect of their environment. You've changed your piece in the environment. That's it. It'd be like if you were part of their room and you suddenly just transferred yourself from being a bookend to a radio playing music. All of a sudden now that music's changing their life. It's affecting their environment. It's going to change how they act. That's all we have to do is just change the role that we play in ourselves. And that's just letting go of our limitations and the idea of that role. And then we're free and freedom spreads.
Yeah, certainly. Every interaction we ever have, or every single thing that we do, is changing things in one way or the other, towards ourselves or away from ourselves, as you've mentioned so many times. And it's exciting to sort of, have those understandings, because it's like we're I feel like simultaneously insignificant and extremely significant in that same exact sort of paradoxical way, and it just makes things very exciting and enjoyable.
Absolutely right. Like every drop in the ocean on its own seems insignificant, but without them all, there's no ocean.
Mhm.
That's exactly the point. So we've managed to cap 2 hours again for this episode. So we will wrap this up here, because obviously we have so much more to talk about. I mean, season 2 is going to be fantastic. I just want to reiterate again for everybody, if you want to be a member of the roundtables going into 2022, do go to our website, fill in the form under Be a Guest, and just let us know that you want to talk, what your social media handles are, and what you want to talk about, and then we'll get in touch with you as soon as we have an event that lines up with your specific topic of conversation. And of course, if you can join us on Patreon, we get more and more content going on there all the time. We will be taking a short break during the Christmas holidays and around New Year's, but then we're going to be continuing our free live events as well. And of course, every third Wednesday of the month, we do our exclusive live stream on Patreon for our supporters. We have another one coming up there in a couple of days, I think this Wednesday. So if you can join us there, those conversations are always a lot of fun. They're always very fulfilling. And I always feel inspired after the fact. So I'm just going to wrap up that there. And I will let Andrew wrap up this episode, because I tend to babble all the way to the end.
Now I'll keep it short and sweet. Yeah, if you can join us on Patreon, we do have that live stream on Wednesday. Very excited for that. I think Mary was the only one who was there last time. So Mary, we hope to see you there, and anyone else who has become a part of our Patreon community. Very excited for that. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in to the episode, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.